College. And then we also have Mr. Peter Hahn. He is an associate professor of humanities at ECC. And then a special guest with us this evening is Mr. Phoenix Phelps. He is a high school freshman at Hampshire High School, and he is also multicultural education group leader, which is short for MEG, MEG. So again, these are our panelists for this evening, and you will hear more from them as the event continues. But now, Ramon, you can go ahead and take the stage.
All right, from the word of Matthew McConaughey. All right. Let's start. So, Gia, would you mind sharing the slideshow for us?
Yes.
Okay.
One moment.
So this is for the agenda for tonight. So we're gonna talk about the historical background of anti-Asian racism, the stereotype dealing with racism in America, and then we have also the Asian identity and also mixed identity. We'll talk about that. Then then we have anti-Asian racism awareness, and lastly is the Q&A portion for that one. So as Gaya said earlier, that there's a lot of going increase of 150% the Asian hate from rhetoric because of what's going on for the pandemic right now, right? But there's a lot of people, Christians, like, whoa, where's this hate come from? Like, it's just sudden that people like, there's no such thing as Asian hate. You guys are wrong. Asian hate has been going on since started in mid 19th centuries. For the historical background for that, let's talk about that. Next slide, Gaya. So it's all started during the California gold rush and expansion of railroads in the West. Okay, there's an increase during that time. There's an increase of Chinese migration, right? So there's a lot of migration from Chinese, and that's why they started the first immigration bill, what I call a systematic racism. Okay, so when that happened, is that there's a lot of racism against Asian. First of all, they call us the yellow peril. Okay, many Americans call them unclean, they're unfit to become U.S. citizen. The reason why is that when they're going to the railroads and working it, they're living cheaply compared to other laborers. Okay, so they accept. So basically, is the employers are taking advantage for Chinese people because they accept what do you call it? The wages is lesser than compared to other for non-Chinese laborers. So, and that's why they hate them, because they're not gonna find a job because the Chinese are taking lower wages for that. Okay, so that's the started the anti-Chinese. So there's a lot of lobby to advocates, lobbying to the legislature, the culture. First of all, because of the opium pandemic during the time as well, and there's a lot. And since because Chinese they tend to close live together, like for example, right now there's like Chinatown, something like that. So just like that before as well. Okay. And many Americans are probably there because of there's prostitution, there's opium, drugs going on. They lobbied the Congress to enact for anti-Chinese, which is called the next slide, yeah. It's the Scott Act of 1888. Okay, so this is a Chinese Exclusion Act. Okay, so it's well harder for Chinese to come in to United States. Okay, so this is the Congress passes bill. Okay, so they can't leave China, go to China, return or come to US because it will be restricted. Okay, then just besides that, in 1892 they expand they expand this. So they expanded, we call the Gary Act of 1892, which is will mandated all Chinese to carry international passport. Okay, so you have to carry those. Okay, so you have to carry those to make sure that you are legal here in America. Okay, so just let then they revised that one in 1902 because in 1902, United States is colonized Philippines as well as Hawaii. So make sure that people, even though they're going, so Chinese can't go to Philippines or can't go to Hawaii. So they have to use, again, the internal passport to bring those. So racism has been there, okay? Move forward, there's a lot of going on in between that. Then it will hit again during the World War II, okay? So people knows about this, the executive order of 9066, okay? So during that time, there's 275,000 Japanese lived in the US, okay, between 1861 and 1940. Most people says like, oh, they will justify it that way we insecurate because of the bomb of Pearl Harbor. That's not true at all because before that, there's especially in the state of California, they try to block Japanese to own a land, okay? Because, and again, it's the same thing from the Chinese that they try to blame the economic, they call that the pandemic, the economic failure during that time. And it's like, who's it gonna blame? They blame other people, okay? So that's what happened is the executive order 1896. So it's not only that because what happened to the Pearl Harbor, but because again, before that, there's a lot of economic pressure already that the many Americans believe that the job was taken away from them. Okay. So next for that is 1960s. The stereotype of dealing racism in America, right? So those racism, systematic is not totally gone, but I think we move on. So we move on those, especially during 1960s, right? So there's a 1960s that's the year of the era of the civil rights movement, right? So there's a lot of social scientists try to justify their racism towards blacks or other minority. So look, this is what happened is if you just try to be Asian, like to be like study hard and stuff like that, you'll be okay, right? So that's what happened. Next slide, Gaya, please. And next slide. So right, so in 1960s, so I'm talking about this is the rise of the gender and racial movements. Okay, so most of them refer to educated and economic success, right? So this is what happened is because there's a lot during the times, there's a lot of Asians coming here in America during the time, and of course there's economic success for Asian right there, and most of the Asians are what they call it as Professor Wu says, outweighted the whites because Asians are more successful than the whites. So that's what he called it. But again, so the social scientists try to justify to identify the protest against the structural inequality. So that's why they get the model minority for this. Okay. So that's what happened is. But that's not totally true about a model minority. We're not really the model right here because, and again, there's a lot of going on the myth of model minority, and I'm going to introduce you to Peter Hand to talk about the myth of the model minority.
Okay, now I think you could hear me. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Peter Hahn. I teach philosophy here at ECC, and one of the classes I teach is Asian philosophy, right? And my time here is to speak more about the model minority myth, right? So some people call it a model minority. Some people who oppose it call it the myth. They're both probably correct to some extent, right? My first exposure to the model minority or the model minority myth is that in 1987, Time magazine on its cover had this feature Those Asian American whiz kids was what it was called, right? And so right now, I'll actually put that linked in the chat for you there, right? Because I'm having trouble sharing my screen here, but you could just check it out on your own. But it's a very famous cover in Time magazine, and they later kind of had to like almost apologize for it or give rationale why they even had that. But back then, it was not a controversial thing. So there's two sides to the model minority there, right? Stereotyping, is it always wrong? Well, why do we even have stereotypes? Stereotypes are based on some truth. Otherwise, it wouldn't even be a stereotype. It would be a flat out lie, right? So we have to look at the facts to be fair with this. Asian Americans happen to be the fastest growing ethnic group in the US. The recent census concluded, and I think now the most accurate count is in 2021. There's 23 million Asian Americans. Now, the projection is that by 2060, within 40 years, there'll be 46 million Asian Americans. So doubling the rate. So Asian Americans have the highest rate of population growth in the US. So even at ECC, this surprised me, but I found this out that there are actually more Asian American students at ECC than African American students. African American students make up 6%, 6.5%. Asian Americans make up 7%, right? And you would not know this. As an Asian American myself, I did not know this about our community here, right? And a lot of that is because there's such a great diversity of Asian Americans, but also we tend to be more like quiet in that sense politically, and I'll get to that in a second there. So going back to the facts, the data here. In general, Asian Americans do well economically and educationally, right? In fact, by most measures, we do the best of any ethnic group. This is including white Americans, right? As Ramon showed in the slide, that Asian Americans out-white the white people, right? That's just a gross way of saying it, but that's the thinking there. In terms of wealth, of all US, all Americans, $62,000 is the average household income. All Asian Americans, it's $86,000 household income. But on the other hand, Asian Americans have a great variety of outcomes as well, right? In general, Asian Americans do very well, but there's a huge spectrum there, right? So we mentioned the household income. Asian Americans do very well in general, but also on the poverty index, 13% of all Americans are at the poverty level. 10% of all Asian Americans are at the poverty level as well. So that's very close to the average there. In terms of education, 54% of Asian Americans 25 years or older have a bachelor's or more, bachelor's or master's or PhD. That's compared to 33% of all Americans in the same age group, right? So this is a significant outwhiting white America in that sense, right? Crime. We're talking about like anti-Asian hate crimes directed toward us, but if you look at the crime rates, if you look at the different ethnic groups, the rate of crimes committed by each racial group, Asian Americans are lowest by far, right? So you could kind of see how non-Asians would look at Asian Americans as some sort of success story if you just look at the facts. The wealthiest, the highest educated, the least criminal, right? So to some people, it's a little weird to get even offended by this. It's like, well, they're saying good things about us. But as with every good thing, there's often a downside to this, right? And unfortunately, what are the downside? And some of this I know from experience, myself or people like myself. I was born in Korea. I came to the US when I was 5 years old. So I'm Asian American, right? So I know both sides there. There's pressure. There's extreme pressure. If you know anything about Asian families, right, there's already pressure to begin with, but now there's real pressure because you have to live up to this model minority, this expectation, right? And for those who actually do well, right, uh, you get filled with pride. I know a lot of very prideful Asians, right? Fancy doctors, lawyers, get all these degrees, and they think that they are better than everyone else. And in terms of measurables, you could argue that way, totally. But sometimes they don't, let's say, check their privilege. You know, I know that's a saying now among the woke crowd, right? Check your privilege, but it really is true here because, for example, there was a phase when I went through this as well. My family was very poor growing up, right? They left Korea with basically nothing, came here, and then through hard work and my studying, hard work was that directed toward my studies. I got all these degrees and all that and did okay, right? And so when I looked at other minority groups that had more advantages from the starting point, right? Like at least your parents could speak English was something that I would think in my head. I didn't have much sympathy. But what I failed to realize was I didn't check my own privilege because I had two parents who worked very hard, who emphasized education. If I were not born into that home that did not emphasize education, I would not have become, at least in my studies, successful, right? So there is that. So some sort of outsized pride there. But for those who don't meet up to the standard, right, there's tremendous shame, a lot of guilt even. Like you embarrass your family, you embarrass your whole race. Imagine that. You're just one kid growing up in the US, and just because you get C's instead of A's, you're like, I'm a failure to all Asians everywhere, right? Tremendous shame and guilt that you carry around. And what's often not taken into account is it's much easier for those folks to drop out of society, to drop out of academia, but maybe even of society, right? To drift along. Because for them, it's so much pressure that if you don't get straight A's or even B's, if you're like a C student, no matter how hard you try, we all have our different talents, right? Some of us are not very good at studying, just like I'm not very good at basketball or something like that, right? Well, if that's the case, then uh, instead of having grit and persevering and making a moderate success of yourself at school, right? You could do very well in school and in life by being a B or even a C student, right? But they easily check out because it's like this A or nothing mentality, right? So I know growing up, I know many, many friends of mine who kind of dropped out of school and such things instead of working harder because they knew they weren't at the top level. Well, what's wrong with being second or third tier in school, right? So you see a lot of that there. And Asians' attitude toward each other. I'll give you some personal examples here. Teaching at ECC, when I see an Asian student in my classes, what I found out doing without even knowing it until I just thought, well, this is weird. If an Asian student handed me a reflection, a paper that was not so good, inside I would be kind of extra hard or disappointed in them because they're Asian, right? Without me even knowing this, I was already judging them by a higher standard, right? Which is actually the case in terms of how America does this, right? You look at some of the elite colleges, there was a Harvard lawsuit. American colleges actually do judge Asians by a higher standard, but I was actually doing that as well, right? And I thought, well, that's pretty messed up there, right? And another instance was when an Asian American student at the end of class, she came up to me and then she was basically like apologizing to me. And I'm like, why are you apologizing? And then, you know, we got to know each other throughout the course. And then she was sharing how, like, her family, some members of her family are ashamed that she's at ECC, right? Because an Asian student being at a community college instead of at least a Big Ten school, if not an Ivy school, is a disappointment. Well, that's, you know, I assure you that's ridiculous, right? I mean, if I had to honestly do my college years over again, I would go to ECC, you know, save a lot of money, get gen eds out of the way, right? Things like that. It just makes sense. But there's that extra sort of thing there because of this model minorities thing here. Um, and value, how we value human beings. This model minority thing, uh, hard work ethic, all of this, it's great, but do we value persons, human beings, by their achievements or for who they are? Do they have an intrinsic worth, right? A worth in themselves. This is what this sort of success uh, standard does, right? It measures people up by how much money they earn, what degrees they get, right? They stay out of jail, you know, these type of things. And that's not very healthy in my view. And the last thing here is politics, politically. One other statistic of the Asian Americans demographically here is that almost half of Asian Americans in the US live out in the West. 30% of Asian Americans live in California alone, right? And if you know anything about national politics, Western states tend to be more progressive, left leaning, right? So the way I see it, some of the harsh criticism of model minority, it's not surprising because you have the second generation of Asian Americans growing up here that are born here. They tend to be more liberal, right? And so any stereotyping is by default not a favored practice by left-leaning people, right? But now you have some sort of disconnect because a lot of the first generation parents who came here through hard work, they viewed success as being kind of where the white people are and even maybe doing better than them, right? So they feel pride in that sense in their children and all of this. But a lot of second generation children, they're more liberal than their parents, right? And they don't view this as good, as something to be proud of. In fact, it could be quite damaging. And you already see this in kind of not only how Asians view each other, but how Asians and, let's say, African Americans or the Latinx community, there's not this unity often, right? So, and I'll end this by saying that the model minority, if you believe that our country is run by devious people through some conspiratorial mechanisms, right? You could see how something like this, it seems nice, but it might be designed or at least practiced in a way so that it divides minority groups. Look at those Asians over there. Why don't the rest of you act like those Asians over there, right? And it causes jealousy and needless resentment, right? So this is something to look forward to there. But if any of you have ever felt as an Asian American this model minority pressure or guilt, even if you've succeeded and you feel guilty about it because you know some other Asians haven't, right? You're not alone. And this is something that we're trying to probably phase out, right? And we see signs of this, but it's very real from my perspective.
Thank you,
Hello?
Peter.
Yes.
We're going to the next segment for the Asian identity and mixed identities for this one, and we're gonna hear from Prim and Phoenix about the Asian identity and mixed identities. Prim, go ahead.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ramon. Welcome, everyone. So there's a lot of truth in what my colleagues had just spoken about. So I'm just going to elaborate a little bit on all of it, just a bit. So truth, not all Asians look the same. We're not all Chinese, and we do not all hail from China. Stereotypical thinking, example, A woman once asked me, she said, "What are you?" She said, "I can't quite tell." So I responded, I said, "I'm Asian." She replied, "But you don't look like you're from China." So not all Asians are Asian presenting, as individuals with stereotypical beliefs may perceive us to be or that they expect to encounter. There are very observable differences and outward appearances among Asians in terms of identification factors such as skin tone, hair color, hair type, hair texture, eye color, and country of origin. I am Eurasian. I was born in Singapore. My parents are of two races. My mother is Portuguese and my father is Sinhalese, born in KL, Malaysia. I am biracial. Asians make up individuals who are mixed race, multi-ethnic, and polyethnic with multiracial backgrounds. Yes, ethnic Chinese are the majority population group in Singapore. The other races still include ethnic Indians and the Malays, recognized as the indigenous community. Singapore is an island city-state in Southeast Asia. It is a multiracial, multi-ethnic country. Side note, the country with the largest Chinese population outside China is Thailand. So let's talk a little bit more about stereotyping. Stereotyping is an ancient adaptation. Why is that? The ability to stereotype was essential, right, for efficient decision-making in our evolutionary ancestors, who were often called to act fast on partial information from a small sample in novel or risky situations. Fine. Under those conditions, the ability to form a better than chance prediction was an advantage. Further, we know the Romans, the Greeks, Mongols, Venetians, Egyptians, they all dabbled in stereotyping and were stereotyped. It is a feature of our biological hardware. Our brain constructs general categories, mental maps, survival maps, schemas, from which it derives predictions, inferences, that is, about category relevant, specific, and novel situations. That trick has served us well enough, yes, to be selected into our brain's basic repertoire. So we need it to survive, right? Wherever humans live, so do stereotypes. Everyone does it. You don't ask a toddler for directions. You don't ask an elderly person to help you move a sofa. And that's because you stereotype the powerful and the powerless. Stereotypes, they do help us make sense of the world. We're able to simplify, systematize information, and then we can identify, recall, predict, and then act as appropriate. Stereotypes can be accurate, but just as well, they can be false. False stereotypes are purposefully promoted in order to cause harm. What happens is it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. We tend to see behaviors that confirm our expectations even when it's absent, it's not there. We make these automatic assumptions, if you will, an overgeneralized belief about every person of a particular group. Checking our stereotypes for accuracy so that we can distinguish the truth from the lies becomes vital then. So let's talk a little bit about identity. Identity is understanding who we are in the world. Part of that is how others understand us, and the other part is how we understand ourselves. Our identity is shaped by a variety of internal and external factors like culture, language, religion, society, loved ones, ethnicity, race, location, the opportunities that you're presented with, the media, interests, your appearance, your self-expression, and my life experiences. Our actions shape our identity, and then in turn, our identity shapes our actions. So we derive meaning and belonging through our identity that is the formation of your beliefs, morals, and your core values. Hence, it is a complex issue for Asian Americans. Am I Asian or Asian American? I am Asian. I'm telling you, I am Asian. I believe in collectivism. I believe in loyalty. I believe in respect towards figures of authority. And I am American. I am. I believe in equality, individualism, directness, and assertiveness. I identify as being both. I am not one or the other. However, our society can demand that I be either or. It wants me to pick one, just one. I have to be one thing or another. I can't be both, two things at the same time. Incoming stereotype. You look Asian, you behave Asian, you are Chinese. I hate Chinese. You are Asian. I hate Asian. You are not American. Asian Americans grapple with understanding if we are both Asian and American, either Asian or American, or neither. Humans, right, we have a built-in tendency to want to belong to groups just as much we want to put people into groups. According to my outward appearance, where do I fit in? I don't know. According to my values, where do I fit in? Do I pride family loyalty over loyalty to my country? As a mixed race individual, do I have a concrete way of describing my ethnicity? Do I identify with one race more than the other? How am I supposed to define myself when people are always defining it for me? As I struggle with my own identity, there's this overwhelming pressure for racial clarity. People want a for sure answer, right? It is especially terrifying to someone when they can't put a finger on you because you are foreign to them. Race, I want to say, is an exception to the rule. There is no one check all that apply box, not until the US 2000 census came out with its multiple selections. Putting us in a box is not the bad part, but putting us in a box with stereotypes is. So here to talk about his personal experience as a biracial individual living in a generation gap is my friend, Phoenix Phelps. Take it away, Phoenix.
I'm Phoenix Phelps, and I'm a freshman student from Hampshire. I am not as well prepared as everybody else was in this presentation, so I do give them credit for that. And they were all very well spoken. I personally like to freestyle instead of being prepared, but going off of what Prem said, I do agree with all of this. Like, I've had my own experience, like such as people don't really get off that I'm Asian until I actually tell them, because immediately people assume that I'm just fully black because I'm Blasian, and then when I tell them I'm Asian, they're like, "Oh, really? You're They don't really assume immediately that I am Chinese or Korean or any of that because I don't really look it. But they do try to guess. It's kind of funny, but I don't blame them because, now people are being a lot more meaningful, sympathetic, and curious in a way. And they ask me, "Oh, what type of Asian are you?" or "What is your ethnicity?" And I try not to get too into it, but I would give them just a vague answer, "Oh, what's your ethnicity?" "Oh, I'm Black and Asian." "Oh, what kind of Asian are you?" "I'm Lao." "What's Lao?" "Oh, it's over by Vietnam. You know where Thailand is? Right next to it." "Oh, okay." And then, so that happens a lot. But then there are those other people that know what Laos is, which I think is super cool to me. Because like the fact that they're aware of that culture or just like that people, that set of people is pretty cool to me. And um to me that it's really important that like people are aware of cultures and just groups of people and their values and that the fact that they do know is pretty cool. That's basically all I have to say because like I am I'm not really like I don't really get asked this question a lot because people I go to people and talk to them and then they ask questions. They're the ones that ask the questions. But yeah, those are my experiences of being Blasian. I think it's great being Asian. I consider myself more Asian than I am American, but I do carry a lot of American traits. And it surprises a lot of people that I do American things. Because, like, like how I look black, but I play golf, which is a white man's sport, or an American sport, which surprises a lot of people. They're like, oh, what other sport? Oh, tennis. What, really? Thought you'd play basketball. Like, and it's just not Asians either. Like, there's multiple ways that people get oppressed or just like, yeah, stereotypes and such. Like when I tell people that I'm Asian, they're like, "Oh, aren't you supposed to be good at school?" I'm like, no, uh, not that great at school, actually. Um, then they're like, "Oh, aren't you supposed to be super smart?" No. One thing that I do carry with me a lot is culture. I'm very well aware of my culture. Foods, Asian foods are great. If you haven't tried it, go ahead and try it. You're missing out. and and Asians in general, like it's a very nice community. They're very all welcoming instead of coming off on the wrong note. But these stereotypes really like if you don't come off right, they'll assume that you're this type of person or you're that type of person. Because Asians do not care what race or what your ethnicity is or who you are, just as long as you're respectful to them and they'll be respectful to you. It's just like the way everybody wants to be treated, right? I don't understand why this matters to so many people and why it's so political, but that is the like how Peter said earlier about ancestry and first group of parents and then the second generation, stuff like that. It definitely does fall into the way that all of our family goes and how um, how we are respected in the community and how we show our values and such. All right. Well, I'm done. If any of you were getting tired, save you some time, right? All right.
Thank you, Phoenix. That's a really nice view. So next segment that we discuss is about awareness. Okay. So Prem, you talk about um, being there's a lot of people being ignorant about our identity everywhere or misidentified us or we lot of racism towards Asian based on our current situation, and also it's not helping about our former president about this rhetoric about being Asian or calling this pandemic, the China virus and stuff like that. So how do we continue fighting and spread awareness on anti-Asian racism?
Great question there, Ramon. So to become aware, okay, since you ended on that note, to become aware, to stay aware, what we need to do is we could allow new information to seep in, right? Remain open, disallow resistance. What I mean is the resistance to not want to know, the resistance to not want to learn, the resistance to not want to ask, the resistance to not want to do away with futa beliefs and unhelpful habits that an individual may carry. Be open, be comfortable with discomfort. What that means is when you allow yourself to be open and to become aware of what is it that you're looking at, the thing that you're looking at, the thing that you're listening to, the thing that you're hearing, doesn't make sense to you. You don't understand, you don't know. So ask, speak, communicate. And when you do that, we tend to become uncomfortable. Why? Because the brain loves routine. It loves our habits. It loves the way we are every single day. So when you put in new information, when you allow new information to come in, you are going to feel uncomfortable. But that discomfort is okay. That means change is happening. So new and challenging environments, experiences, individuals, when you are among something new, when you are doing new things, when you are learning new things, what you're actually doing is you're promoting vulnerability within you. Vulnerability helps build trust. It helps build rapport. It helps build relationships with each other, with one another. Something else we can do is have more conversations as you become open to doing things that you've never done before, talking, communicating about subject matters that you've never wanted to, never cared for. What happens is during those times, have those conversations towards race, about race. Continue to encourage, and as leaders, wherever you are, whatever it is that you do in your role, speak up bluntly and directly about racism, and do so in your own families and in your social circles. Address the harms that you know about, that you read about, that you hear about, anti-Asian, harms that have happened from anti-Asian sentiment, right? Do it as if it was a preventative measure. Confront during those times your own racist attitudes and understand that we may all have some ideas or beliefs that are more covert, which is implicit stereotypes. Question those stereotypes that lay on your subconscious, that you have no control or awareness of. Question your explicit stereotypes, the stereotypes that you are aware of, that you hold, and aware that you're using it to judge people. Question it. Yes, you're going to become uncomfortable, but that is when change happens, when you feel that. Tailor your workspace environment, wherever you are, in your companies, in your offices, in your practices, as safe places, as safe spaces. Develop during those times your empathy. Put yourself in another person's shoes, understand their suffering, and take active steps, really take active steps to reduce it in your own neighborhood and relevant areas. And then connect individuals to resources and organizations such as Stop AAPI Hate. Visit their website at Stop AAPI Hate. It's really a toolkit for addressing anti-Asian bias, discrimination, and hate. They offer advocacy. They help raise community awareness. It is a safe place where you can gather and learn about ways to cope with anti-Asian hate and on how to report a hate crime incident. If you were to encounter one, hashtag Stop Asian Hate. You can report violations as well, submit an inquiry with the Illinois Department of Human Rights. We can drop the web address for that in the chat. And then know and utilize your community crisis hotline numbers, 847-697-2380 in English, in Spanish, 847-697-9740. Once again, we'll drop that in the chat box. And for teletype, we have 847-742-4057.
Thank you, Prem. So this goes to our next question. So this is very common. Or talking about awareness about the ancient hate, right? But there's a lot of people like, oh, we're talking about anti-racism, but why now? But most Asian are not politically active. Why is that? So my answers to that is there's a lot of theories what's going on. Again, before we're gonna go to there's a generation shift. We're gonna talk about the first generation people here. As Peter said before, that the first generation people are the values that we're talking, the education is very important. So that's what we are taught for. Like, oh, so we have this, if you just go work and get education, your life be better. There is no be racism against Asian. But that's not really true, right? But again, we are embedded our model minority that we're good, that this is the road to not be discriminated. Okay. And and even though we get discriminated, we just because of our value, we just bow down and do not um what do you call it? Do not react to it because we got taught like if you're gonna react, then it's gonna explode, then there's gonna more chaos. So that's why we've been taught for first generation. The other thing is most of these people right here is from third world country, right? So there's migration. Remember in 1960s from Asia coming in. There's a political war already during the Asia coming. Most of these Asian are refugees coming in here. Why are we gonna involve in politics right here that they know already that there's chaos already in their country? They're scared for their life already. Now they're gonna come over here that they are not from here. So that's the other idea too, that this is not our country. We're just gonna bow down and stop. We're gonna bow down and okay, just go work hard and study. So that's what we've been taught. But now there's a generation shift. So the next question I'm gonna do is: should Asian be politically accurate now, especially with the generation shift? So I'm gonna address this to Phoenix. What's his thought about it? Especially he's the new he's Asian plus again he's mixed plus he's the first generation who lived and born here in America, which is totally different perspective from the people from her parents and stuff. Go ahead, Phoenix.
Well, first off, like I do think that Asians should be politically active because you can't let all the other people choose for you because what if it's against you, you know? Asian people should have like that voice in political terms. They should they should be able to vote for their president. They should be able to help the community, help share our culture and just make people more aware of what's going on. And definitely with the generation shift, yeah, I guess that could be a problem because people tend like people my age either tend to be really into politics or don't really uh, care about it at all. I'd say like I'm in between. Like sometimes politically, some things are just like useless. Like some things are just like unnecessary. But since people made that decision, it has to go through, right? So we should all have a political opinion on what is happening and what should happen in our country, our state, and our communities. Not just for us, but for others as well. For those people who don't have that voice, and for people who don't have that option. So I definitely think that we should have a bleh, 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 words. We should be politically active, especially since especially since Asian Americans, that's the one. I mean, Asian Americans are now the population is going up as the generations go on. So, answer is yes, we should be more politically active.
Hey, thank you, Phoenix. Um, Peter or Prim, do you have anything else to add?
I would say we will become more politically active, and we are, if anything, because of these unfortunate hate crimes, of course, right? But um, speaking to both political parties, right? Be careful be careful that you don't assume the Asian Americans to vote a certain way as one monolithic bloc. There's a tremendous diversity there. To the Republican Party, I think a lot of them were very surprised because a lot of first generation Asians who immigrated here with nothing, they worked hard, right? Most of the ones I know voted Republican. And you're like, how? That doesn't make sense. They're poor. Shouldn't they vote Democrat, right? The Democrats couldn't figure this out. Well, they emphasize hard work, individual accountability, right? No welfare, right? You work for what you get, right? And because of this tremendous optimism that they had, and but what Ramon was saying, a lot of these folks were leaving like hellholes, right, of situations, right, refugees, right. So if your background, history is like the Vietnam War, right, you're going to come here and work your butt off. So maybe the Republican Party took that for granted, and they see that the children of these people that tended to vote politically conservative, right, are going the opposite direction, and they're very surprised. But to the Democrats, I would also caution that you can't just assume that all Asians would agree with the sort of progressive agenda there as well. There's a tremendous diversity there, right? So right now, I think nationally, politically, it has swung left, but that might be just kind of the extreme reaction to the previous generation. What I will say, one extra thing is, there's not this harmonious relationship between Asian Americans and other minority groups in this country, right? It's uncomfortable to say, but this is true. And uh, that is part of our fault, I would say, as an Asian American. Because if you study hard, you live in the nice suburbs, gated communities, you don't have to worry about politics. You know, that was kind of thinking. So a lot of Asians, when we could have done more, we could have done more to, let's say, support BLM, for example, right? But now Asian American hate is happening, right? And then you see certain other people from other minority groups who are saying, well, now you want to support you. Where were you guys, right? There is some credence to that, right? So I think this is where there's a term called intersectionality, if some of you are not familiar. That is very important going forward, right? And I think Asian Americans can help with this movement, right? It's not just Asian Americans looking out for themselves or African Americans doing it. It's intersectional, right? We have to take each other's kind of struggles in a totality there. So yeah, in general, Ramon, definitely, I think we're going to become more politically active. I just don't know if either of these political parties will make a smart offer to Asian Americans, right, to kind of win us over one way or another. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. And you are really correct, Peter, that the first generation are more tend to vote Republicans, especially for Filipinos communities. My parents, my aunts, and stuff like that, and they know that Republican, and the other Filipinos that know the first generation, they are really Republicans. That's why then we're talking about their kids and stuff like that. They are more tend to be democratic or leaning to be in left and stuff like that. So that's why it's very important about we're talking about being politically active, especially there's a generation shift. And also, and again, we cannot rely because as Asia, as Asians, there's a lot of variety of Asians right here. If you look at it in our statistics right there, as you said, there's 24 million already. But out of those 2 million, most of those are 85% for those are only six countries from Asia, bases or 19 Asian countries here in America. So before we're gonna go to the question, the Q&A, I hope there's in the audience right there to share the experience for you have experience about anti-Asian racism, the experience here in the community. So any volunteers to share with it your experience? No one? No takers. About you, Peter. I know you said you have experience about racism.
Sure, Peter, go first.
Oh, geez.
There's ample to go
First
around.
off, we work at a great institution, right? I just want to be officially on record to say that, right? We tend to be moving toward the right direction, but occasionally, even here, as an employee at ECC, place I love to work at, right? You do see certain things that kind of make you raise your eyebrows a bit here and there, right? So these will be categorized under what we call like microaggressions. I have not been called like a racial epithet to my face on, gratefully, thankfully, right? But it's these little things that kind of build up over time. So in one meeting I had here, faculty meeting, right? We're going around asking for ideas, a brainstorming session. And then I was like thinking about something I didn't really speak. And then one comment was, do you got anything to say? And I was like, I'm still thinking. And then one comment by a fellow faculty member was, well, Asians are mysterious people, So, and then I kind of laughed it off, right? It's kind of like that. And if you know, like those Fu Manchu movies with long beards. So I was like kind of going like this, right? And then the hilarious thing was, oh, you can't do that, Peter. That's racist. I'm like, you idiot. You're the one who just said this, right? And then so I was just doing this. So yeah, maybe not the best, but yeah, you do get those moments here and there that you wonder. It's like the people who are supposedly very progressive about it still make certain comments and certain attitudes about things. One other example is like we had another meeting with administrators saying that the topic was, should you allow students to call you by your first name, right? And the majority of the faculty there, I understood what they said, right? Most of the faculty were like, sure, we want to create a sort of friendly environment, like no power trip or anything like that, right? But then I said, well, if we're really being tolerant or respectful of every different culture, right? If we're trying to be culturally responsive, right? Then we also have to take into account that, because they knew my position, the way I was brought up, the way I was raised, I think a lot of you would agree, you can't address a professor by their first name, right? It's almost so disrespectful, you can't even think about it if you're brought up in a Confucian setting, right? But that itself was kind of called into question, and they were side-eyeing me, right? So there's that there as well. It's like, if we're so tolerant of different cultures, then why are we kind of assuming that the Asian here will be kind of compliant and not raise problems here, right? So yeah, I hope I didn't say too much here. Again, I love this school, this institution, great people to work with, but without knowing, some of these things do pop up. And I'm sure I'm guilty of some of that stuff from other people's perspectives as well, right? So yeah, it's a progress, Ramon, right? But every once in a while you see it, yeah.
Okay.
We do have someone who had posted on the chat, and they shared that their wife, and I'll read this verbatim. My wife, after we got married, had to change her social security card. She's Lao. The white social security office worker insisted several times that she needed to produce her Japanese passport. Didn't seem to even know Laos was a country, or that there were Asian-looking people who were not Japanese. Surreal, a person who works at the office in the Chicagoland could be that ignorant. What are your thoughts on that?
That's what we're talking about. Part of the Asian identity is that the ignorant. There's a lot of ignorant people around here that, again, we see only certain things or see us as one, like Chinese or doing Japanese, but never thought that there's other countries, for example, like Indonesia or um, call it Thailand or other places, more Cambodia and stuff like that. So because of your appearance, you just assume, that's what I said. I mean, you're not gonna be surprised that because ignorance is everywhere. Okay, so we will not be surprised about that. So
I would like to add to that because, like, okay, he did kind of take what I was gonna say about being ignorant and stuff like that, but I think that some people, I don't blame some people because, like I said earlier, people are curious and sometimes they're just a little uneducated and just aren't aware. But there is a point where you should ask the person, like, in a respectful manner, oh, what Asian are you, or what's your ethnicity, and not just immediately assume who they are as a person or what their race is, or just because of what they look like or act like or what they wear or just stuff along those lines. And yes, I definitely agree with Ramon. And yeah.
I agree with Ramon and Phoenix. This is where I once again want to, just mention compassion. I know we talked about awareness, right? But let's just for a moment, let's just, put it out there, compassion. I understand it's maddening. When you're on the receiving end of all of this, it's maddening, it's heartbreaking. But at the end of the day, we're all human beings, right? There are certain things where we don't realize that if we took the time, it can get better. So part of this is taking the time, becoming aware, once again, with compassion that, you know what, you done me wrong, right? Now I'm hurt. And how could you be so ignorant? I understand. But then if you take the time, you can be the teacher. You can be the one putting it out there, extending that arm, that hand out there and saying, you know what? I'm upset at what you said, but let me be the one to teach you to I don't want to say educate you, it sounds as it does, but to, build up, the knowledge here that, okay, this is where I'm from. This is why you don't say this. This is what it is. Sort of put the information out there, because the more information that can get out there, the more people can, the ones that want to be aware of, the ones that want to learn, the ones that are open, they remain open, they take that in. And then it's like a ripple effect, right? You throw a pebble in the pond, it creates a ripple effect. I affect you, I leave an impact on you, and the hope is you're going to pass it on. So if you carry that out with compassion, change can happen. It will not be groundbreaking, but change is just that. It's not overnight change, right? It happens in bits. So I do my part, no matter how upset I am, I'm going to, be there for you, even though you put it out there and it wasn't right. And that person, who knows, they can make that turnaround. So I would advise that, not to just walk away with hurt, because we already do that. So what can we do otherwise to make change come about?
thank you, Prem. We have a question. All right. So we have a question in the chat. For those whose families voted Republican, what are they saying about this anti-Asian hate? Are they attributing it to Trump's statements? Anyone will answer for that? Okay, I'll answer this because it happened to my family. Okay. No. So, all right, I want to be honest. Okay. Um, and again, I have a lot of families here in the United States. My aunts, uncles, and stuff like that. All of them are Republican, are Trump supporters. Okay. So I've posted on Facebook, like, look, if you can vote this person right here, don't bother to be my family or stuff like that, right? And they flat out say that they still vote for being for Trump. And I told them, look, what's going on? We're Asian right here. We get been racist, and you still. The hardest part is you just ignore it. That even though Trump is being racist and just being ignore it, like no, it's just like nothing happened, and they just still vote for Trump. What am I going to do? Well, look, I don't care if you're a family. If you're racist, then just be it. I rather stand my principles rather than about family of racists. So I don't want to be associated with you. So there's a lot of them, but again, family is still family. But if you're racist, I don't want to be associated with you. So there we go. Do we have any questions from our audience before we wrap it up, or share any stories like about
I do have a story to share. Actually, it happens quite often, and I share a lot of this experiences. I'm actually writing a book about my entire experience of corporate America. It's $40 and a dream and breaking through the bamboo ceiling. And although I've been successful in the, in the corporate world, I still had those pitfalls that we as Asian Americans go through. And as of just recently, I just went through the same exact experience. And so I'm also a business coach, and I had this opportunity to, they reached out to me to, for this contract. It was for a 350 center company. They wanted me to develop their training center, training curriculum and everything. A coworker of mine that worked with me from my previous position, she actually reached out to me and asked because they created this position and she thought I would be perfect for it. After, long story short, after going through, several interviews, I was offered the position twice, or the contract. Once a contract, and then they asked me what it would take to actually bring me on board as an employee. And I said, sure, if you still allow me to work my business, if you're flexible with my hours, I can work remote, then I would do it. And I spoke to the VP of the company. I spoke to everybody. I had probably about 5 interviews or 5 interactions. It was all by phone. And even with HR, it was by phone. So the only person who knew what I looked like was my former coworker at my previous corporate job. And mind you, my name is Laura Robertson, right? So you wouldn't think I'm an Asian American, allow American, because I use my name Laura in the corporate world on purpose because of this particular reason. I can't use Nippon because automatically they know, right? Anyways, I even spoke to HR, and HR said, yeah, we're excited to have you. You're going to start April 19th. And we're just, finalizing the paperwork. We're going to send you, do your background check. My background check, I finished all of that. We want you to start April 19th. Then the VP reached out to me and she said, well, the executive team would like to meet you and one more person to meet you. And then this was a couple weeks ago, right after like April 19th. And one more person would like to meet with you. And I said, oh, sure. I had no idea. This time it was a video call. So after 5 interviews, after speaking to HR, after going through all of this, They didn't know what I looked like. And finally, they prompted me and made me click the video app. And I had no idea it was a video call because all the other calls were on the phone. And the only person that knew what I looked like was my former coworker who knew how I worked and who knew my qualifications fit exactly what they're looking for, because I would be partnering with her. And so immediately they prompted me to click video. It didn't give me any other option. I had to click video, and I'm like, oh shoot, they want to see my face. So, oh my goodness, it was honestly, I've been in management for the last like 15 years, you know, and corporate in education. I've ran campuses, I've ran schools. This was the most intimidating interview I have ever had. This CFO saw me on the video and he looked so disappointed that I was Asian. He did not look me straight in the eye for the entire time. I screenshot it because I was so like, wait a minute, am I seeing what I'm believing? Am I believing what I'm seeing right now? He did not even look me in the eye. He rubbed his neck the whole time. He looked backwards. He looked up. His eyes were moving around. I was talking the whole time, but no body language. I read body language because that's how I train on when I'm training on communication. And he was totally unengaged, totally uncomfortable. And then the last thing you know, he's like, I don't have anything else. Do you, Carol? You know, and so he immediately told her, and then she immediately said, yeah, Laura, you know, we're going to reach out to you by the end of this week to let you know if we're going to bring you on as a contractor or bring you on as a W-2 employee. And that's it. Like, I already had my start date, everything. And then I got word from an inside source. So mind you, they saw me on Tuesday. I got a word from the inside source that said that she heard from them on Friday. And they said they were backpedaling and saying that they wanted to seek out this other girl whom I worked with at my last job, who only had a couple of years of experience, who had less credentials, less experience, who they already rejected once. And so they were going to bring her back on to kind of, you know, and I kindly rescinded. I emailed them immediately, like after I had a bad feeling, after what my inside source told me, I immediately emailed them. So, and I said, you know, I said, thank you for the opportunity and all of your time. I said, I kindly rescind the desire to move forward with your company at this time. And I left it at that. It was a 6-figure contract. I left it on the table because I felt really awkward. And I just went with my instinct. And I said, thanks, but no thanks.
Thank you, Laura, for sharing that. I totally understand where you're coming from. Yeah, like even though when you're writing a resume, you are really like you change your name because, and again, your name is so ethnic, and you're scared if you get an interview or not, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you know, I stopped using Nippapon because you know, I wouldn't get any calls, and you know, almost like something similar has happened before where I had a interview and they were all like, yes, we love you. You have great credentials, you know, and it was for a college campus, you know, and then one of the ladies that was on the call, she went to my LinkedIn profile and saw that I was Asian. And they told me that I would get a call from HR. It was for Judson College. They said I would get a call from HR, so to schedule my in-person. Then one of the hiring managers reached out to me. I mean, not reached out. I saw that she looked at my profile at LinkedIn. Before I even opened up my email, there was already a one of those default emails. Like, you know, we found somebody, oh, you found somebody in less than 12 hours? Like, seriously? Because the interview was at 6 o'clock at night. Then 2 hours later, she looked at my LinkedIn profile. And then the very next morning, it was like, oh, we found somebody with more credentials, but the position was still posted.
Yeah. So I have an experience like that as well, like resume, right? So when I first graduated from college, so I put my name, Ramon Albino. So it's not really Asian name. However, it could be look at it as Mexican or Latino, right? So my experience with that, like, oh, I've turned in so my resume, so like this careerjobs.com stuff like that. So I put Ramon Albino as my name right there. I don't have any get response so many, right? So I changed my name to English. So I put Raymond, and the last name is still albino. So I changed to Raymond White because albino. So it's like, so I changed. I got tons of response from resume. And I shared this one from one of my teachers. Like, first of all, it's like, oh, how do I improve my resume with this one? So it's like, oh, don't worry. This is the market right now is so slow, so you're not getting an interview. But when I changed my name to Raymond White, I still got calls from HR from there. So, and then again, I can't really justify it that it's because of my name, but I had to receive a lot of phone calls when my name is Raymond compared to Ramon. So I totally hear you, Laura, and thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. And, I know it happens, and of course, you don't know or can't judge what their intentions or what the intentions are. But just because you've experienced racism in the past, you can't help but to think that it is racially related. I share a lot in my book about the racism that I have, went through as an Asian American, starting from elementary school at Garfield Elementary, when my 5th grade teacher told me I didn't deserve this country, all the way to my corporate career, and all of the things that you had to go through just to break through the bamboo ceiling. I've been successful, and I am successful and was, in the corporate world, but you had to go through all of those loopholes just to get there. And you had to fight your way up to the top, more so than anyone else,
Thank you so much for sharing that, Laura. So sorry that happened to you. It's very unfortunate that this happens out there in the real world, of course, especially when you're looking for jobs and having to worry about, even just the name that you put on a resume and your application. So, but thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for everyone who had posted questions and comments for tonight's event. And thank you so much for all of our panelists, Ramon, Phoenix, Prem, and Peter. Thank you so much for being a part of this event, and for everyone who's here with us this evening. This is a very important conversation, and hopefully it's been an informative event for you all, and you've learned something that you can take away from tonight's event. Like one of the guests had mentioned earlier, the uneducated people that are out there. Hopefully this is part of that education piece that we can continue having these conversations with our friends and family, and inviting them to these type of events. So once again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is brought to you by the Asian Pacific Month Committee at Elgin Community College. And I do want to remind you to please, please, please follow us on the Student Life Facebook and Instagram pages. We are going to be continuing our Asian Pacific Month celebrations throughout the month of May. And then keep a lookout for tomorrow's post, another famous Asian American highlighting their accomplishments and who they are. And then on Fridays, every Friday in the month of May, we are highlighting a local Asian cuisine from different Asian countries. So check those out. These are local restaurants who may have been struggling through this pandemic, and would definitely benefit from your support. So once again, thank you so much for tonight. Have a great evening, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Take care. Thank you, everyone. Nice meeting you, Phoenix. Bye-bye.